Hello again, and I'm here now with Andrada Fiscutean. Is this richtig? Is this correct?
It's
It's
perfect. Thank
it's
you.
perfect. Okay, thank you very much. She's a tech journalist from Romania and also a collector of clone computers. And this is the big topic of this talk right now: clone computers in Romania. And so, after my short introduction, would you please maybe give us a more detailed introduction of yourself? And also, what was your first computer? Maybe I have some idea. And what was your favorite computer game of this time, or your most memorable?
Okay, so I was born in 1985 in a small town in Transylvania. The town is called Regin and it has rich German heritage.
Yes.
Uh, Yeah, and I started covering technology, I'd say more than 10 years ago. And I often write about cybersecurity and the history of technology because I kind of remembered what happened in the early 90s better than what happened last year. And I also like to cover the countries who were part of the Eastern Bloc or who have a somewhat similar mentality. So I've written stories about Belarus and Ukraine and Bulgaria and North Korea. I think I first bought my retro computer 7 or 8 years ago when I wanted to try to use again the computer that I used when I was a child. And it was an HC 91. HC stands for home computer, and it was a Spectrum clone that was built in Romania. I have a somewhat similar computer in the background that
Yeah, see?
you could see. And as a journalist, I often write stories about people who don't have a lot of resources, but who manage to build things because I find their life and their experience inspiring. It's easy to build something when you have all the resources available. But the true heroes are the people who try to build things out of thin air. And this is something that also connects me with the history of technology in the Eastern Bloc. As a child, in that small town in Transylvania, I went to the Children's Palace, which was some sort of paramilitary organization that was tasked during communism with preparing children to be part in the army. But that was something that never happened. So we went there to study computer science or photography or electronics or theater or whatever was available there. And I remember that it was a blackboard on one of the walls that had like 3 problems to solve to write code in BASIC. And when you were able to finish the whole 3 of them, you were able to go and stand in line and wait to play a game as a reward. So these computers that were built back then in Romania, which were clones of the British ZX Spectrum, used a TV screen and also an audio cassette as storage. So there weren't hard drives back then, so we stored games on audio cassettes. And I remember playing games such as, I don't know, Chucky Egg and Dizzy and Manic Miner.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And these were some of the titles that I care about. I only got my real computer, which is an IBM computer, I would say in the mid 1990s. So before that, I used Spectrum clones and also a Romanian computer that had CPM. The name of that computer is Cube Z.
Okay.
So that was also there. I don't think that a lot of those were produced.
Okay, that's really interesting. As you said, Transylvania has also a big German heritage. That was there is this game Castlevania, and there was a PC Engine version from 1987, 1988 for the PC Engine CD-ROM version. And in the intro, they have a comic style intro, anime style intro with the German voiceover. The Japanese version got the German voiceover, and in all the years, I thought, okay, yeah, that is because um, often Japanese, when they think about Europe, they think about Germany, so they connect it together. But I really realized a couple of years ago that this was really true, because at this time when this game plays, German was the language in Transylvania, and this was the main spoken language. And it was okay, wow, okay, this was very fascinating. And every time I hear about Transylvania, I think about Castlevania, and so that is very connecting in my head. But as you said, the ZX Spectrum was the computer at the time in Romania. Also, mostly the clones. And that is very interesting, because when I get into this computers in Eastern Europe, I realized that in every country, different system was the favorites. And Romania is a system from the British ZX Spectrum. But why? Why was the ZX Spectrum and also the clones so popular? And when started the computer scene in Romania?
I'd say that Romanians cloned the ZX Spectrum because it had a simple design. So, and there were clones that were built not only in Romania and Eastern Europe, but also in South America and even in Hong Kong, because it was simple. It's a small computer, really girl-like. If you ask me, it could fit inside a purse, and it was cheap to make. And it had a lot of circuits inside that could be cloned. So most of them, you would slice a ULA, and you would just use a microscope to see what was inside. And a really good technician, a trained eye, would definitely be able to reverse engineer that. So this is why a lot of people in Eastern Europe decided to clone these computers. I would just like to go back and to spend a couple of minutes thinking what it was like then to live in Eastern Europe. So we only had 2 hours of TV program a day. The contact with technology was, let's say, at a lower level. A lot of people didn't even have landlines, so they weren't able to talk to their friends on the phone. So the level of technology wasn't that high. And we were living in a communist country that had its border closed. So we had computers, and ZX Spectrum clones were the devices that made young people feel like God in a country with very few options. And one of the people that I interviewed once told me that the fact that he could play the game he wanted when he wanted gave him the illusion of choosing for himself.
Okay, wow.
Computers were powerful devices, and video games were not just video games. They were things that would kind of help people be active and give them a few chances that were just impossible to conceive in a communist country. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That is something that we here in Western Europe often forget. How important that is, that we living in a free country. Right now in the COVID situation, we have a small bunch of people. They are demonstrating and said, "Hey, we are not allowed to have free speech." And we said, "Yeah, because you are on the street and no police is slaying you together. That is." You see, you are allowed to have free speech, and you can say anything against the government, and have no fear of your life. And that is something we forget. As you said, yeah, we are only allowed to watch 2 hours of TV. We have only 2 hours of TV program in the 80s. I said, okay, yeah. When I remember back, we have a couple of 3 main programs in Germany. And in the mid 80s, then they came to private station, and then was like the USA. But 2 hours, whoa, that should.
I do remember watching, so we got cable news at some point in the mid-90s, I would say, and we got ProSieben and Sat.1, and it was just fantastic to watch. It was so glamorous, it was everything. Let me show you my favorite clone, if I can.
Yeah, sure, please.
This is the Spectrum computer, and this is a clone. Just for size, this is a Cobra computer that was built in the dorm rooms of Politehnica University of Bucharest. And I'll just get this closer to the camera, and I'll have you look at the keys, and you'll see that these are general purpose keys that have some paper that was glued on top of them. You can see.
Yes.
Photo paper that was glued on top of them. So these are some of the computers that were built by students on the black market, and they are even expensive at this point in 2020. So there were a few factories in Romania that were building computers, but the idea was that they were mainly building computers for factories or for schools. So there was no possibility for a person to have to get a computer if his family was not connected to the regime. So people would try to build their computers themselves, and it was a black market that was operating at this time. So some factory workers would make small defects in motherboards, and those motherboards were seen as faulty, and they were taken out of factory, and they ended up on the black market, and then they were sold. There were electronic dealers in the campus of Politehnica University of Bucharest. You wouldn't find drug dealers then, but electronic dealers, and they were sold at a fraction of the price, and they ended up in the dorm rooms, and just students there who knew how to use the soldering iron, which was fantastic, and they were able to create these computers using smuggled components. And also electronic components were quite expensive back then on the legal channels, because the regime didn't want people to build radios. So the borders were closed. They didn't want a free media, so this is why they tried to raise the cost of building electronics as high as possible so that few people could afford it. And I also have a factory Cobra, which was equally difficult to get, but luckily I have friends. So this is a factory Cobra, and it's a 2-in-1 computer because it has.
This is an Amiga keyboard?
Yeah, this is the original one.
Okay.
And these features both BASIC and CP/M, so it was 2-in-1 computer, and this is why the students cloned that one, because they felt like they could do more with it. So it was the do-it-yourself mindset, the machine that made you feel like a god, and the fact that all intellectual property was a disputable concept back then. Companies were less interested in fighting patent wars with the East, so as long as you came up with a good idea, you wouldn't care. You just wanted to play with that machine and basically learn as much as you can.
Okay, as you said, the black market at a university, which sounds at first a bit funny, but in the end, wasn't it also risky and for the students to build them? Was it illegal to build a computer back then?
It was a highly illegal operation, and the students knew that, and they knew that they could get expelled. On the other hand, if a cop came to you and he caught you building a computer, you could just bribe him. And bribery worked at that time, because these were very priceful goods to have, and there were like other goods, like a pack of canned cigarettes or coffee that were also used as bribe. And this could also work because when you have a system that's not working and nobody was happy about what was going on within the country, so people would just bond, even though they were supposed to be on different sides.
Okay, yeah.
So it was and it wasn't. I don't know.
It is very fascinating to see the different countries. I mean, I watched the documentary Mole Man, and they said when they got to the border and the border patrol checked there and see the Commodore C64. What happened was they get into their room, showed them, and played with them together for a couple of hours, and then they could leave because they were so excited to play with the computer. And it's I'm very happy to hear that it was illegal, but at the end, yeah, there were ways to get out of this. So yes, so when they built this, and you said black market, so they built them also for them to develop, program, but also to sell them. I think cheaper than an. Was it possible to get official, if you have the money and the connection to the to the government? Was it possible to get an official computer like this ZX as import, or was it generally not possible?
So you had to have money, you had to have connection, and you also had to wait. So these were three things that all the planets have to align for this to happen. One of my friends whose father was a really good mathematician, and mathematician in Romania had special privileges back then because the daughter of Nicolae Ceausescu, the dictator, was a mathematician, and she led a mathematical institute. So his father went abroad for a conference and brought him a computer inside a diplomatic suitcase, because that would this way you would avoid border control. So and yeah, some of these computers were brought in from the West, but it was really difficult to get a computer from an official channel. So if you went to the campus, you could get it for the equivalent salary for 5 or 6 months.
Okay.
So that was a third of the official price of a computer in Romania. So the black market made good computers that were reliable, but they were also a lot more cheaper than the ones that were sold officially.
Okay. So beside the computers, the hardware aspect, there were also software, because why did they build the computers? To develop programs, but also video games. How was the video game market in Romania? I don't think they had much the chance to get Western titles, but so I think also there was a way to get them. And like in Western schools, they shared them, the tapes or discs later. So how was it in Romania, and how was the own market there?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, sharing was caring, as you said back then, and there were different networks. I would just like to thank to our, let's call them friends in Yugoslavia and Poland, who were really were better than us and were living in more open countries, and they had more computer games than we did. So many games that entered Romania at that time from the West entered through Yugoslavia or to Poland. And what Romanian coders did at first was to take this game and to localize them, to translate them into Romanian, because people back then in Romania, not a lot of them would speak English. So if you have a local title, then it's easier. Gaming was the main reason for which you would buy a computer. So there were also some games that were developed in factories or in research institutes. And one of them is a clone of Chucky Egg, and the developers wrote that they built it totally outside business hours, and it had slogans such as "Don't smoke, don't drink." So it was highly and I don't know, and to meant to educate people in a way. Yeah, and the community, these communities were like small communities spread around the country. Many of them were in like the bigger cities, in Transylvania, in southern Romania, or in the eastern part of the country, where people would get together at one person's house and would just say, "Okay, let's build a game. Which games? What should happen?" And they would just start from there. Yeah, I've seen a clone of Chucky Egg, a Romanian clone, and other such games. And what was interesting was that you could building a game could be a one-person project, a one-person and one weekend project. So you would see pretty quickly the results of your work, which also functioned as an incentive to do more of that. And then that game would end up on different tapes and gaming compilations, and a lot of people could play it in a very short amount of time. So yeah, I think it functioned as an incentive for people to learn how to code and to learn how to interact with technology, and even to learn English, which I think is also helpful if you want to build a strong tech community.
Yeah, yeah. I think that are similarities to Germany also, because you learned with your computer English with the games. You looked, okay, what in a book, translation book, what before Google, what does this word mean? I mean, Leisure Suite Larry is a very common title for young adults in the 80s in Germany. So as I say, when they made these games, was it for, did they sell them or try to sell them also on the black market, or was it just, okay, here's my game, here's a tape, copy it, have fun?
Yeah, it was pretty much like that. I don't think that there were people who wrote games for profit back then. I only know of one person who was living in East Germany, so that made money out of computer games back then. His name is Andre Weisflog, if I pronounce it correctly.
Yeah, it's correct, yeah.
So I believe that he was perhaps one of the very few people from the Eastern Bloc who made money out of writing video games. Yeah. Other than that, maybe the companies that appear later, such as California Dreaming in Poland, who made one of the most fantastic games that I played during the 90s, Blockout, which is a 3D version of Tetris.
Yeah.
Like a really, really cool game. But yeah, other than that, I think it was more of a research project, a social project. So gaming groups mostly function like social networks back then, and you would just exchange your game and show people that you're capable of doing great things. And I also feel that information and knowledge was the currency of these people back then.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when the times changed, the revolution began, was also the community a part of it? Did they use the computers or games, like I read in other countries, also in Romania, for to be a part of the revolution?
I think this mostly happened in Czechoslovakia, but I would say that the people who played games in the late 1980s in Romania were some of the most forward-thinking people. And I talked to many of them about the revolution and what happened back then, and some of them were there on the street. One of them was defending his university against people who wanted to attack them. And what's touching to me right now was that these very same people that were among the first video game players in my country were some of the most socially active people. I saw them on the street a few years ago protesting against the government who wanted to push legislation that would basically make bribery okay in the country. They were there protesting against the government. They were here this year as well when they built 3D printed face shields for the doctors.
Yep.
So the fact that they were part of this community of forward-thinking people in the first 1980s somehow allowed them to understand what a country should be like and how it should function like and what are the values of democracy, maybe a little bit before us, the other one.
Okay. Yeah, that's really quite interesting. That I heard often from also the other countries that they're very active, maybe on the streets, but also maybe with the computer, as you say, Czechoslovakia. They use the games for this because the government didn't understand what happened there, so they could use it mostly and were not in danger. So yeah, that was it. The time is really very fast, and like the other ones, I've still a lot of questions, but time is out. So Andrada, thank you very much for this really interesting view of the clone computers in Romania. So thank you very much for being my guest here.
Thank you for having me here, and I'm always happy to spread the word about the history of computer science in the Eastern Bloc and especially in my country, in Romania.
Yeah. So thank you and goodbye.
Bye.